Under the glaring fluorescent lights of a local feed store, an 80-year-old man swallowed his pride, pushing a faded velvet box across the counter. They laughed, offering a sack of cheap oats for his silver star. But the sneers died instantly when a battle-scarred military dog broke away from its handler, dropped to its belly, and bowed at the old farmer's trembling boots. The rusted corrugated roof of the barn rattled against the biting November wind, a hollow sound that Elias Farnsworth knew all too well. It was the sound of a dying farm. Elias stood in the center of the dusty, unlit aisle, his breath pluming in the freezing air as he stroked the coarse, graying mane of a massive draft horse. The animal, blind in one eye and ribs faintly visible through its thick winter coat, nudged the old man's shoulder, seeking grain that was no longer there. "I know, old girl Elias," whispered his voice, as coarse as dry gravel. His hands, scarred and twisted by decades of brutal labor and severe arthritis, trembled as he patted her neck. "I'll get it sorted today. I promise." Elias Farnsworth was a relic in a world that had moved on without him. At 82, he was the last surviving resident of what used to be the agricultural heart of Oak Haven. The town had transformed over the last 2 decades. The sprawling family farms had been swallowed up by corporate developers, replaced by sleek artisan coffee shops, boutique clothing stores, and sprawling estates for wealthy weekenders escaping the city. Elias's property, a modest 50 acres at the edge of the valley, was the final holdout. But nature and economics had conspired against him. 3 years of unprecedented drought, coupled with the crushing medical debt from his late wife, Martha's battle with pancreatic cancer, had drained every cent from his accounts. He walked back to the farmhouse, his left knee locking with every third step, a permanent souvenir from a shrapnel wound, sustained in the jungles of Vietnam in 1968. The house was cold. He had turned off the propane heater 3 days ago to save fuel. Sitting at the worn oak kitchen table, Elias stared at the final notice from the regional bank. Foreclosure was imminent, but that wasn't what kept him awake at night. What broke his heart was the immediate reality: his pantry was entirely empty, and the feed bins in the barn contained nothing but dust. The local animal rescue had promised to take his last 2 horses next week, but until then, they needed specialized senior equine feed to survive the dropping temperatures. Elias pushed the foreclosure papers aside and pulled a small, heavy mahogany box toward him. The wood was scratched, its brass hinges oxidized with age. He stared at it for a long, agonizing hour before his trembling fingers unlatched the front. Inside, resting on faded navy blue velvet, lay his history. A purple heart, its gold edges slightly tarnished. Beside it, the silver star. Elias didn't see pieces of metal. He saw the impenetrable darkness of the Ah Shao Valley. He heard the deafening roar of artillery and the desperate, choked final breaths of his squad leader, Sergeant Cole Matthews. Cole had taken a bullet to the chest to drag a wounded Elias out of the kill zone. The silver star had been pinned to Elias's uniform by a general who smelled of peppermint and expensive cologne, but Elias had always known the medal didn't belong to him. It belonged to the mud. It belonged to Cole. For 50 years he had kept it locked away, a silent monument to a debt he could never repay. Closing his eyes, a single hot tear carved a path down Elias's weathered cheek. "Forgive me, Cole," he rasped into the empty kitchen, "but the living need to eat." He placed the medals into his heavy canvas coat pocket. The truck's transmission had blown 2 months prior, leaving him no choice but to walk the 3 miles into town. The journey was agonizing. The icy wind whipped across the barren fields, biting through his frayed layers. Every step sent a jolt of fire up his ruined leg, but the thought of his starving animals kept his boots moving against the asphalt. When he finally crossed the town limits of Oak Haven, Elias felt like an apparition. Sleek imported SUVs glided past him. People in expensive, pristine outdoor gear hurried along the brick-paved sidewalks, their eyes deliberately averting the hunched, limping figure in the stained Carhartt jacket. He didn't belong here anymore. The town he had fought for, the town he had returned to, and fed with the sweat of his brow, looked at him not as a veteran or a neighbor, but as a nuisance. His destination was Briggs Supply and Hardware. It was the only place left that sold agricultural feed. It had been founded by a good man, Samuel Briggs, who used to extend credit to farmers during bad harvests. But Samuel was long in the ground, and the store was now run by his son, Calvin Briggs, a man who valued profit margins over community, and who had recently converted half the store to sell overpriced organic gardening supplies to the new demographic of townspeople. Elias stood outside the glass doors, the electronic bell chiming merrily as customers walked in and out. He took a deep, rattling breath, feeling the heavy lump of the mahogany box in his pocket. It felt like walking into a combat zone all over again. He pushed the door open, the scent of fertilizer, fresh leather, and artisan roasted coffee hitting him all at once. It was time to trade his honor for survival. The interior of Briggs Supply was brightly lit and bustling. Elias shuffled toward the long checkout counter, trying to make himself as small as possible. He stood off to the side, waiting patiently, as Calvin Briggs, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a perfectly trimmed beard and a condescending smile, rang up a customer. "That'll be $85 for the imported koi pond filters, Mayor," Calvin said smoothly, bagging the items for Richard Harrison, the newly elected mayor of Oakhaven. "Worth every penny, Calvin." Richard chuckled, adjusting his cashmere scarf. "The estate is really coming together. By the way, have you heard anything about the bank finally clearing out that eyesore at the edge of town, the Farnsworth property?" Elias stiffened his grip, tightening on the mahogany box in his pocket. "Any day now, Richard," Calvin replied, leaning over the counter conspiratorially. "Once the bank seizes it, the developers are putting in that new golf course. Town's finally cleaning up." Elias stepped forward, his boots scuffing loudly against the polished linoleum. Both men stopped talking and turned to look at him. The mayor's smile vanished, replaced by a look of mild disgust, while Calvin sighed loudly, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Elias," Calvin said, his tone dripping with impatience, "I told you last week I can't extend your credit. You owe me over $400 for the winter hay." "I'm not asking for credit, Calvin," Elias said quietly, his voice raspy from the cold. He unzipped his jacket with trembling fingers and pulled out the heavy wooden box. He placed it gently on the glass counter as if it were made of fragile glass. "I need 2 bags of the senior equine mash, and maybe a few cans of soup from the provision aisle. I have something to trade." Calvin raised an eyebrow and slid the box toward himself. He flipped the latch and opened the lid. The silver star and the purple heart gleamed faintly under the harsh store lights. A heavy silence hung in the air for a second before Calvin let out a sharp, barking laugh. He looked at the mayor, shaking his head. "Are you kidding me, Elias? You brought me pawn shop junk." "That is a silver star," Elias said, his voice tightening, a rare flash of anger piercing through his humiliation. "Earned in the Aishau Valley, 1968. It's solid silver, and the history doesn't pay my distributors, old man." Calvin interrupted, picking up the silver star by the ribbon and dangling it carelessly. "What am I supposed to do with this? Hang it on the wall next to the weed whackers? I run a business, not a charity for forgotten wars." Mayor Harrison chuckled, shaking his head. "Honestly, Elias, it's a bit pathetic. Bringing in trinkets. Maybe the local middle school will give you $1 to show it at show and tell." The cruelty of the words felt like a physical blow. Elias lowered his head, his cheeks burning with a deep, consuming shame. The store had grown quiet. A few other customers had stopped browsing to watch the spectacle, their eyes full of pity or indifference. Elias felt the ghost of Sergeant Cole Matthews standing beside him, and the guilt of cheapening his sacrifice was suffocating. "Please," Elias whispered, abandoning his pride entirely. "Just the feed. The horses are starving. Take the medals. Just give me the feed." Calvin dropped the medal back into the box with a dismissive clatter. "Tell you what. Because my father liked you, I'll give you 1 bag of the cheap oats. Not the senior mash. The cheap stuff. And 1 can of beans. For both medals." It was a blatant robbery. The medals were worth infinitely more, both intrinsically and historically. But Elias had no leverage, no energy, and no hope left. He slowly nodded. Okay, Calvin." As Calvin smirked and turned to ring up the insulting trade, the electronic bell above the door chimed sharply. A young man stepped into the store, bringing a rush of freezing air with him. He was tall, athletic, and moved with a rigid, disciplined grace. He wore a faded olive-drab tactical jacket, and the left side of his face bore a jagged, faded burn scar that curled up toward a partially missing ear. But it wasn't the young man that drew the immediate attention of the room. It was the animal walking flawlessly at his left side. It was a massive Belgian Malinois. Its coat was a rich mahogany, and black, its muscles coiled tight beneath its fur. It wore a heavy-duty tactical harness adorned with patches, and a thick scar ran down its hind leg. The dog's eyes were sharp, scanning the room with terrifying intelligence. Corporal Liam O'Connor, recently medically retired from Marine Special Operations, walked toward the counter to ask for directions to the interstate. His dog Titan, a highly decorated military working dog who had completed 4 tours in Afghanistan, walked in a perfect, unbroken heel. Calvin looked up, intimidated by the sudden presence of the combat veteran and his formidable K9. "Can I help you, sir?" Liam opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. He glanced at the open box on the counter, instantly recognizing the silver star and the purple heart. Then he looked at the frail, trembling old man standing in front of it. Before Liam could process the scene, Titan reacted. A fully trained MWD never breaks heel. They are conditioned to ignore food, loud noises, and other people unless given a direct command by their handler. But Titan suddenly stopped, his ears pinned back. He flared his nostrils, taking in a deep breath of the air around Elias. "Titan heel," Liam commanded quietly. Titan ignored him. For the first time in his life, the battle-hardened Malinois disobeyed a direct order. The dog stepped away from Liam and walked deliberately toward the old farmer. Calvin stepped back, looking alarmed. "Hey, get that dog on a leash!" Titan didn't growl. He didn't bark. He walked up to Elias, lowered his massive head, and let out a deep, resonant whine. The dog nudged Elias's frozen, arthritic hand with his wet nose. Then, to the absolute shock of the young Marine and everyone watching, the Malinois circled the old man, once dropped heavily onto his belly, right across Elias's boots, and crossed his front paws. He looked up at the old farmer with eyes full of absolute, unwavering reverence, pressing his warm body against Elias's shivering legs to provide heat. Liam stood frozen, his eyes wide. He looked from his dog to the hunched, weeping old man, and then to the medals lying on the counter. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together in the young Marine's mind. "He's never done that," Liam whispered, his voice echoing in the dead, silent store. Never. The silence in Briggs' supply and hardware was absolute, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the commercial refrigerators and the ragged, whistling breaths of Elias Farnsworth. Everyone stared at the massive Belgian Malinois resting its chin over the old farmer's frozen boots. Corporal Liam O'Connor slowly closed the distance between the door and the checkout counter, his eyes fixed on the open mahogany box. He recognized the heavy navy blue velvet. He recognized the Purple Heart, but it was the silver star that made his blood run cold. Liam had seen one awarded posthumously to his own unit commander in Helmand Province. He knew exactly what a man had to endure, what a man had to lose to earn that piece of metal. Liam looked at Calvin Briggs, whose smug expression was rapidly dissolving into nervous confusion, and then at Mayor Richard Harrison, who was clutching his bag of artisan koi filters like a shield. "I heard the tail end of your negotiation," Liam said, his voice terrifyingly calm. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that carried the lethal weight of a seasoned infantryman. He stopped right next to Elias. Titan looked up at Liam, gave a soft thump of his tail against the linoleum, and pressed his flank harder against Elias's leg. "Look, buddy," Calvin stammered, attempting to regain his authority. "I don't know who you are, but you need to get your dog under control. He can't just be laying all over the customers. And this is a private business transaction." "A transaction," Liam repeated. He reached out with a scarred, steady hand and picked up the mahogany box. He didn't dangle the medals. He held them with a reverence that made Calvin flinch. "You offered him a bag of cheap oats and a can of beans for a silver star, a medal earned in the Aishau Valley. 1968. Do you even know what happened in the Aishau Valley, mister? Briggs?" Calvin crossed his arms defensively. "I know I run a feed store, not a museum." Liam's jaw tightened, the jagged burn scar on his cheek pulling taut. The Aishau Valley was a meat grinder. It was a month of pure, unadulterated hell where American boys fought in the mud, surrounded, outgunned, and bleeding out in the monsoon rain so that men like you could stand in a heated store and sell overpriced fertilizer. The man standing in front of you bled for this country. He lost brothers for this country. Mayor Harrison puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intervene. "Now see here, young man. I am the mayor of this town, and there's no need for this hostility. Elias is bankrupt. He's losing his farm next week anyway. Calvin was doing him a favor by giving him anything at all. Those medals are practically worthless to a bank." Liam turned his icy gaze to the mayor. "Worthless. Let me tell you about worth, Mr. Mayor." Liam reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He slammed 3 crisp $100 bills onto the glass counter. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Load his truck," Liam ordered, his eyes boring into Calvin. "He doesn't have a truck," Calvin muttered, his face flushing deep red. "He walked here." The information hit Liam like a physical strike. He looked at Elias. The old man was trembling violently, his thin-stained Carhartt jacket offering no protection against the freezing November weather. He had walked 3 miles on a ruined leg just to feed his animals. "Then you will load 10 bags of your most expensive senior equine mash into the back of my truck," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave. "And you'll throw in a case of your best provisions. Soup, stews, whatever you have. Keep the change." Calvin hesitated, looking at the money, then at the heavily scarred veteran, and finally at the dog. Titan had lifted his head, his dark eyes locked on Calvin, with a predatory stillness. "Do it," Liam said. It was not a request. As Calvin hurriedly scuttled out from behind the counter to gather the feed, Liam gently closed the mahogany box and pressed it back into Elias's trembling hands. "Put these away, sir," Liam said softly, the harsh edge in his voice completely vanishing. They never belonged on this counter. Elias looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. The shame that had been crushing his chest slowly began to lift, replaced by a profound, agonizing gratitude. I didn't have a choice, son. The horses, They're starving. Martha's gone. I'm all they have left, and I failed them." "You haven't failed anyone," Liam replied fiercely. He knelt down next to Titan and stroked the dog's head. Titan was a bomb sniffer in Afghanistan. He saved countless lives. He only respects two things: authority and honor. He smelled the combat on you, sir. He smelled the blood, and he smelled the sacrifice. He knows a warrior when he sees one. And so do I." The mayor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the shifting dynamic in the room. "Well, this is very touching, but it doesn't change the facts. The bank is foreclosing on Friday, Elias. The developers have already signed the preliminary zoning permits for the golf course. You can delay it with a few bags of feed, but you can't stop progress." Liam stood up, his towering frame casting a shadow over the mayor. "Who is buying the land?" "A private development group," Harrison said, lifting his chin. "Oakstone Holdings." Liam memorized the name instantly. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just looked at the mayor with a cold, calculating precision that made the politician take a step back. "Come on, Elias," Liam said, placing a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. "My truck is out front. Let's get you and your girls fed." Titan immediately rose to his feet, positioning himself faithfully at Elias's right side, perfectly matching the old man's slow, limping pace as they walked out of the store and into the freezing wind. The drive to the Farnsworth farm was quiet. The heater in Liam's heavy-duty pickup blasted hot air, slowly thawing the ice from Elias's bones. When they pulled up the rutted, snow-dusted driveway, Liam's heart sank. The farmhouse was dark, the paint peeling in long, sad strips. The barn was leaning its roof, sagging under the weight of neglect and time. It was the desperate picture of a man who had fought a war on two fronts, one in the jungle and one against poverty, and was losing the latter. Liam carried the heavy 50-pound bags of feed into the barn as if they weighed nothing. When he poured the rich molasses-scented senior mash into the wooden troughs, the two emaciated draft horses let out low, rumbling nickers of pure joy. Elias stood leaning against a stall door, weeping silently as he watched his beloved animals eat their first full meal in days. Titan sat perfectly still beside him, offering silent, unwavering support. After the horses were settled, Liam walked Elias into the dark, freezing farmhouse. He grabbed an axe from the porch, chopped a pile of firewood, and got the heavy iron stove in the living room roaring. Once Elias was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, with a hot bowl of stew in his hands, Liam noticed the stack of papers on the kitchen table. Foreclosure. Liam read, glancing over the documents. He saw the total amount owed: $22,000 in back taxes and missed mortgage payments. To a corporation, it was pocket change. To Elias, it was an insurmountable mountain. And then Liam saw the name of the purchasing company, listed on the town's eminent domain proposal, attached to the back Oakstone Holdings. CIO. Richard Harrison. The mayor wasn't just facilitating the town's development. He was orchestrating the theft of Elias's land for his own profit. He had weaponized the local bank to bleed the old veteran dry so he could build his country club. A familiar, righteous anger ignited in Liam's chest. He had spent years fighting enemies in the desert, but the worst kind of enemies were the ones wearing suits and smiling at you in the grocery store. "Elias," Liam said, quietly pulling out his smartphone, "I need to take a picture of you and Titan, and I need you to let me tell your story." Elias looked up, exhausted and bewildered. "My story, son. Nobody cares about an old farmer with a bad leg." "You let me worry about that," Liam replied. That night, while Elias slept peacefully in a warm house for the first time in weeks, Liam sat by the fire. He took a photo he had snapped of Titan, bowing to Elias in the feed store He had pulled the security footage straight from his dash cam that had captured the view through the store window, combined with a stark, heartbreaking picture of Elias holding his silver star next to the starving horses. Liam was an administrator for a massive online network of combat veterans, a digital brotherhood spanning hundreds of thousands of former service members. He wrote the post with the brutal, unfiltered honesty of a Marine. He detailed the mockery in the store. He named Calvin Briggs. He exposed Mayor Harrison's connection to Oakstone Holdings. He explained the $22,000 needed to save the farm of a Silver Star recipient who had been laughed at for trying to trade his blood for horse feed. He hit publish at 2 a.m. By 6 a.m., Liam's phone was melting down. The post hadn't just gone viral within the veteran community, it had exploded across the entire internet. When Elias woke up and shuffled onto his front porch with a cup of hot coffee, he dropped his mug. It shattered on the wooden planks. The rutted dirt road leading to his farm was completely blocked. A convoy of over 40 pickup trucks, motorcycles, and horse trailers stretched as far as the eye could see. Men and women wearing weathered leather vests, tactical jackets, and faded military caps were pouring out of their vehicles. They carried chainsaws, toolboxes, lumber, and bales of premium alfalfa hay. A massive, bearded man with a patch from the 101st Airborne on his jacket walked up the steps, took off his hat, and extended his hand to the trembling old farmer. "Morning, Elias," the man boomed gently. "We're here to fix the roof, and the fence, and the plumbing." Liam stepped out onto the porch, Titan faithfully at his heel. He handed Elias a tablet. On the screen was a crowdfunding page. The goal was $22,000. The current total raised over the last 4 hours was $145,000, and the number was climbing every second. "You're not fighting alone anymore, Elias," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. The cavalry arrived. The twist of fate didn't end at the farm. By noon, local news vans had swarmed the property. The exposure of Mayor Harrison's backdoor dealings with Oakstone Holdings caught the attention of the state attorney general. Within 48 hours, the mayor was forced to resign under pending fraud investigations, and Calvin Briggs's store was entirely boycotted by the town, leaving it eerily empty. Elias Farnsworth didn't lose his farm. With the funds raised, he paid off the bank, fully restored the barns, and started a sanctuary for rescued draft horses. But the greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the young Marine and his devoted Malinois who never left. Liam moved into the guest room, finding the peace and purpose he had lost after the war, working the land side by side with the old hero. Titan, the fierce dog of war, spent his retirement sleeping in the sun on the farmhouse porch, keeping a watchful, loving eye on the man who had traded his honor for the ones he loved. If this story of unbreakable brotherhood, fierce loyalty, and the ultimate respect for our veterans moved your heart, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. Every interaction helps us bring more incredible true-to-life stories to light. Drop a comment below to honor our military heroes and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful journey.